Thank you everyone for coming. Actually the time has passed too. We're missing actually one more speaker for the expert insight session, but I'll be very happy to begin with welcoming two opening remark speakers and the other 6 invited speakers for the expert insight session as well. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us from around the world, both in person and virtually through YouTube. Welcome to our official side event of the 2025 High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, titled Blue Youth, Mobilizing Students for Ocean Action in East Asia and Beyond. My name is Hyung-kyung-ha from Hope to the Future Association, an NGO based in Seoul, South Korea, and I'll be serving as a moderator for today's event. We are very much honored to bring together youth leaders, educators, experts from the United Nations system, and even civil society organization members. Today, we're going to discuss the urgent need for inclusive and intergenerational action for sustainable ocean development, special links to SDG 14, Life Below Water. To begin our event, it is my distinct honor to welcome two speakers for the opening remark and the welcoming remark, Mr. Uk-jin Chang and Ms. Eun-ju Kim. Can you please come to the stage? So it's my honor to welcome a senior official of the United Nations who has dedicated his career to strengthening civil society engagement within the United Nations system and the 2030 Agenda. Mr. Uk-jin Chang is chief of the NGO branch at the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs and formerly served as Director General for International Organizations in South Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Chang for his speech.
Good afternoon. It is a great honor and privilege to be here to speak about the UN and SDGs in this very important meeting. Like the moderator said, my name is Uk-jin Chang, and I'm working at the United Nations. And today, I want to talk about the passion and compassion with my personal and official journey. As a career diplomat, I had a chance to work in many different places, like Washington, D.C., and Saudi Arabia, and Costa Rica, and New York, and 3 different countries, and 3 different cultures, and 3 different religions. And in 2009, I was posted to a beautiful country, Costa Rica, a small country in Central Asia. You can see in there. And my kids were small at the time. There was a rural town called Quepos, located 5 to 6 hours away from the capital city of San Jose. And it was purely by chance during my very first trip in Costa Rica that my kids discovered a small elementary school named after my home country, Escuela de la República de Corea, which is the School of the Republic of Korea. Interestingly enough, there were no single Korean children among the students. And there was no apparent connection between Korea and the school or the town itself. When we first visited the school, the children greeted me with full of surprise and wonder. And it was indeed their first time ever encountering a real Korean in person. And then they expressed their doubt by saying, Senor, are you really Korean? I said, of course I am. But I could not see, I could see that they were not believing my words. They brought pictures of Song Joong-ki and BTS and said they thought all Koreans must be like them. And after a week of activities in the school, as I prepared to depart, a group of children approached to me again and shouted, Senor, I now get it. You truly are Korean. You must be from a different tribe of Korea, in Korea, and we found someone exactly like you. I smiled with the thought that they found one of the K-pop star or movie star who resembled me. And they proudly showed me a picture of Psy. Anyway, as a young Korean diplomat, I started helping the school with my government and volunteers. As a diplomat, of course, it is important to work to negotiate and promote your national interest, but I truly enjoyed spending my private time to share the thoughts and culture with the Costa Rican kids. And I was helping them to promote the goals we are pursuing, which is the SDGs now. And I realized the passion alone might not be sufficient enough without compassion. And to this date, my family still continues to visit the school every year from here to support the school by providing assistance and teaching Korean languages and sharing how best they can contribute to the SDGs. And ladies and gentlemen, now let me share my next story, which centers around the United Nations. I had an honor to work for Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General, when he was Secretary General. And during that time, I had an honor to meet with the President Obama at the time and Xi Jinping and the late Pope Francis to discuss about climate change and all the global issues. And I even met with the famous the 007 and Angelina Jolie, but it was not they were not to see me, but to Secretary General. But I had an honor to take picture with them. And however, the reason I decided to leave my government position to become an ambassador and return to Korea the United Nations 3 years ago was not because I had the glamorous and prestigious moments with those celebrities, but rather because I found that the bigger cause I can contribute to is way much bigger in the United Nations than in national government. And with him, I had a chance to visit 120 countries in 3 years, but mostly in Africa and Middle East and Latin America to promote SDGs and the global issues. And whenever and wherever there were natural disasters, war, and conflicts, or even Ebola crisis, we risked our lives to be there to share our passion and compassion and sympathy from us. One significant experience occurred during the global refugee crisis in 2015 and 16, when I visited refugee camps all around the world together with Secretary General. And in one of the camps, I was shocked to witness that 4 generations had been living there for their whole lives. And 3 out of 4 generations, starting from the fathers, the grandfather, and father and the children's generation were born in the camps, and they have never been outside the camps. Despite all the materials provided by the UN and the international community, there was a palpable absence of hope. And they see outside the world only through the television. And the younger generation could not connect what they see in the TV with the real life in the camps. It became evident that while material assistance were essential, the absence of love and hope and compassion created a profound sense of despair. I realized that compassion cannot be easily given by the government officials or UN staff members, but rather by the volunteers from the NGOs with their hearts and minds. This realization prompted me to return to the UN. And I'm honored to be here today to meet you and speak to you as the chief of the NGOs of the United Nations. And for the past decades, the number of global challenges literally exploded with crisis after crisis. From Arab Spring, conflicts in Syria, Libya, Myanmar, Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Ukraine, and Middle East now. They are coupled with financial crisis, food crisis, climate change, and pandemic, and we find ourselves facing an unprecedented number of challenges all around the world. The recent the Secretary General's report highlighted that over 330 million people in at least 69 countries are in dire need of the UN support. And these are the UN's focuses as of now to help those in need. And women and children are always the most vulnerable in times of conflict and crisis. And clearly, the United Nations and governments alone cannot tackle these challenges in a traditional way. This is why I'm proud to work with the 6,500 more NGOs worldwide that have relations with the United Nations. Now, I'd like to share my last story on the SDGs and future. And always, like I said before, the most vulnerable, especially women and children, during the conflicts of the crisis, are suffering still now. And it is precisely for this reason that young generation like you hold immense significance. And throughout your young and bright mind, together with passion and compassion, you can change the world. And we need to, and you need to align yourself with the important goals of UN's the Sustainable Development Goals adopted in 2015, specifically with the aim of leaving no one behind. Look at this the 17 SDGs to be achieved by 2030. And it is not something the governments or diplomats can do alone. And you can find these 17 goals are something you and your family and your the community can closely work on. And this vision is deeply rooted in the spirit of passion and compassion. However, with less than 5 years left before 2030, you can see that only 17, not 70 targets are met as of end of last year. And clean water and sanitation is one of the in the bottom of this graph. And in a world plagued by crisis and challenges, we must remember that our collective efforts can and should make a difference. This is the picture of the Malala, of the famous of the children of the activists. This is the picture of the Malala together with 193 children when SDGs were adopted in 2015 unanimously at the General Assembly. They were of the head of states, kings, and of the head of the governments on the floor to adopt the 17 goals. And these of the 193 of the children were seated at the balcony, overlooking the head of states and king and of the diplomats, saying that this is our future, and you cannot ruin my and my future generations' future. So it is not just the action you need to do, but it is our action also. So in that regards, please think about SDGs and these global issues to yourself. And it is not something you can expect all generations like us to complete. But you need to take an ownership, and you need to work hard together with your local community and your family members, and together with us. And I'd like to conclude my brief remarks with my mentor and my all-time Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. And he said, "We are the first generation to end the poverty. And we might be the last generation to stop climate change." So this has we need to work hard to end the poverty as soon as possible. And we need to have the sense of urgency to stop the climate change for our future and your future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing your personal and professional journey and your message to the youth as well. I can expect many of you has heard of Incheon, one of the metropolitan cities in South Korea, serving as a global hub for global exchange and education. So it is a great pleasure to introduce a leading voice of youth education, Ms. Eun-ju Kim. And she's the director of the Department of Global Citizenship Education at Incheon Metropolitan City Office of Education. Please welcome Ms. Eun-ju Kim for her welcoming message.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to meet you all. My name is Kim Eun-ju, Head of Global Citizenship Education Department at Incheon Metropolitan City Office of Education, a leader of global citizenship education in South Korea. We live in a globally interconnected world where nearly every corner of the world is interdependent, which creates a global environment where mutual influences inevitably occur. In 2015, the UN had set 17 Sustainable Development Goals and is striving to craft a transnational approach to address grave issues that affect us on a global scale, such as war, terrorism, and starvation, with the aim of meeting these SDGs by 2030. At today's 2025 high-level political forum-side event, we aim to address the topic of Blue Youth Mobilizing Students for Ocean Action in East Asia and beyond. The Incheon Office of Education is carrying out its commitment to global citizenship education rooted in students' unique talents and individuality through the Connect to the World education policy. 20 students from our very own Incheon city are participating in today's event. Today, our students will engage with the international professionals to explore solutions to marine ecosystem problems in South Korea and Incheon. Our youth represent our dreams and our future. These experiences are crucial in empowering our youth to understand and address the global challenges that lie ahead. I extend my sincere gratitude to Hope to the Future Association for organizing today's event and would also like to say thank you to all participants. We look forward to a fruitful exchange of ideas at today's event. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kim, for continued dedication to empowering youth as global citizens. Please give, again, a round of applause to both speakers to move down the stage. Now we move into our expert insight session, which features 3 invited speakers from the United Nations system and international development fields. Each of them brings a unique perspective on ocean action and sustainability. So I would like to welcome 3 invited speakers and 3 youth presenters from Incheon to the stage. This session has been designed to foster intergenerational integration, connecting expert insights with the voices of youth and civil society as being myself. We hope that today's exchange will bridge experience and innovation, helping us collectively envision a more inclusive and equitable approach on SDG 14, Life Below Water. Our first speaker brings over 30 years of experience in global development policy and poverty eradication. Dr. Donald Lee is the president of ATD Fourth World International and former chief at United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, where he advanced social inclusion and rights-based development strategies. So he'll be speaking on the theme, Leaving No One Behind in Ocean Action today. Please give a round of applause.
Thank you, Hannah, for selecting this topic for me. Hannah wrote to me and said, "Would you come and speak on this?" And I said, "Yeah, it's interesting enough to talk about leaving no one behind in the context of ocean action." But let me preface my talk by saying that humans have this love-hate relationship with the ocean. We love going to the beach. We love all the sporting activities we can participate in the ocean. We love going on cruises. But at the same time, we have this hate relationship. We treat the ocean as a toilet. We pump our sewage into the ocean. We treat it as a garbage tip. We pollute it in so many ways, and in recent years, as a dumping ground for plastic. So we have to come to a point of reckoning where we need to have a more holistic approach within the overall SDGs and work very hard to have a sustainable approach to ocean management. Where does the concept of leave no one behind come from? I believe it comes right from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And by establishing human rights and encompassing diverse communities and people from different backgrounds and different economic situations, to have a commonality in terms of dignity and respect and the right to participate in social and economic activities without hindrance. So this principle is key to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and of course, the Sustainable Development Goals themselves. Oops. Oh, it's not going to the next slide. This isn't I can use the clicker, it doesn't seem to be working. Yes. It's not Okay, thank you for that. This is what happens with technology. When you least expect it, it comes and bites you. So the other aspect of leaving no one behind is that we focus on specific segments of the population, in particular the vulnerable. So we want to include vulnerable groups to prevent marginalization in the development process. And my work with poverty around the world has shown that inclusiveness is a very valuable and important tool in encouraging social and economic development among people who are living in poverty. And if we apply the principle of leave no one behind to ocean stewardship, then the same principles that we apply for poverty eradication, inclusiveness, and voice, and participation will ensure that no one is excluded from the benefits of ocean stewardship and also participation in the decision-making process. So the relevance of leave no one behind ensures that our conservation efforts are very inclusive, that everybody has the ability to express their needs and rights within the conservation strategies. And having diversity within the decision-making process gives the whole approach richness and focus that you do not have if you do not have a policy to ensure that everybody participates. And leaving no one behind ensures that we promote responsible and sustainable use of marine resources. And finally, we ensure social justice, that everyone has equitable access and benefits from all the policy initiatives that we undertake to ensure that they have a role and a place in the marine environments where they are currently located. So who are these people? I think the most immediate group that is faced with the impact of changes in the ocean environment are people like small-scale fishers and coastal communities. They rely on marine resources for their daily livelihood and sustenance. 1 in 14 globally rely on seafood for subsistence. Right? 1 in 12, nearly half of whom are women, depend on small-scale fishing for their livelihoods. Now, this may seem rather low, because I've seen estimates of 3 billion, but the 3 billion figure does not look at the particularly vulnerable groups. Now, the 1 in 14 and 1 in 12 are the ones that are most immediately affected by poverty and by their particular choice of vocation. They're living in coastal areas and they're engaged in marine activities. And they face special challenges. And these challenges affect the quality of their life. It affects their resilience. And the most immediate impact of any change in the environment is reduced income and job losses. So we have climate change impacts, we have changes in the degradation of the ocean. They will see it most immediately in reduced income and job losses. The other vulnerabilities they face are, in order to progress in a sustainable way, they need access to credit. They need to escape food insecurity. They need to get away from depending on one single resource. So if seafood is your main avenue for subsistence, then if anything happens to disrupt the supply of food, then you face serious food insecurity and economic insecurity. And of course, being in a vulnerable group, you have a lack of access to the usual things that we talk about under the SDGs, social services, health, education, etc. And more seriously, over time, the loss of traditional knowledge and culture when these groups begin to peter out and disappear. And one of the things that we notice in most areas of development is that these marginalized groups often do not have a voice. And it's not any different for small-scale fishers and coastal communities. NGOs as well are often excluded from discussions and decision-making processes, even if they're directly impacted by ocean-related issues. And one of the reasons why they get pushed out and they have a loss of voice is the power dynamics. Powerful actors like large corporations and governments from wealthier nations may dominate sea governance. So they prioritize their own interests over the needs of others. So the need for a global governance approach to the oceans is important so that you have a global view of how you manage resources to benefit everyone. And this difference in power dynamics is reflected in the fact that poorer communities will lack the necessary knowledge, technical expertise, and resources to participate effectively in complex discussions and negotiations. So very often their participation is token if they are forced to go into a meeting or a conference or negotiations, and the people they face speak a completely different language. They talk about concepts that they never heard of, even though they're talking about the same thing. And finally, the decision-making processes may lack transparency. So decisions are made and people are unaware of how that decision has been made, how it's going to impact upon them, and who's responsible for taking those decisions and for any negative outcomes. One of the key things in ocean management is to ensure that we preserve the deep marine knowledge that these communities have. And this knowledge is often place-based. Because the small communities, they have specific knowledge about a particular area, about the ecosystem, about the impact of human activity, migration patterns, seasonal changes. And these are very, very important as inputs into making decisions about marine management and ocean management. And what we need to do is to try to integrate these traditional practices into our decision making and to meld it with the scientific marine science that we have in order to come to an outcome that works for everyone, to build a sustainable world where even the needs of the least powerful are taken into account. And we want this tradition to continue. And it's also important in terms of the cultural impact. If you strip away all this traditional knowledge and you strip the cultural benefits and the cultural knowledge that they've developed over time. Women, youth, like you are today here, play critical roles in ocean communities. Women, as I mentioned, they make up half, or nearly half of the population of people engaged in small-scale fishing. So they are involved in various aspects of fisheries, from catching and processing, the marketing, and they contribute to marine conservation, food security, and livelihood. So the communities benefit from them, and they have deep knowledge and influence within their communities. So we need to ensure that their views are also taken into consideration. And young people, especially those who have active participation in ocean conservation and in promoting sustainable practices, can raise awareness among these communities, and raise awareness within the areas in which they work, or in schools. So you can leverage your skills and technology to develop solutions for ocean-related challenges. I've been speaking very positively about all the things we can do, to get vulnerable populations to be involved in a sustainable ocean management. But there are limits to it, practical limits which we have to, and barriers which we have to overcome. First of all, is poverty. So poverty is a significant barrier to the ability of vulnerable groups to participate in ocean management. Indigenous people, small-scale fishers, and coastal communities. Very often they don't share in the benefits derived from marine resources. So very often, if they're poor, you're forced to rely on marine resources for immediate survival. That's why I mentioned that 1 in 14 rely on marine resources for subsistence. And when you have that situation of relying on one single resource for subsistence, then it leads to overexploitation and unsustainable practices. And these groups tend to be marginalized, and this marginalization, because of their poverty or because of their social status, they may be immigrants, they may be migrants, and this affects their voice in ocean-related issues. So your poverty acts as a barrier to participating fully in the decision-making processes. And more realistically, political and institutional barriers can prevent these populations from participating in policy-making regarding ocean resources. And it's quite striking that very often Western scientific knowledge is prioritized over traditional ecological knowledge. So it's seen as superior, and we have to overcome this line of thinking. We have to give value and credit to the acquired knowledge over time of communities that have dealt and lived on this, the fruits of the ocean for a long, long time. Right? So they know very intimately about the areas in which they live. So we have to take that into account. But if we prioritize formal education, we we rely on formalized knowledge, then you're not going to have a conversation with them because you're talking at cross purposes. So I talked about limited access to resources and decision making. They lack the access to vital marine resources, and this can impact the economic and social well-being. And this can be this exclusion can take many forms, right? So it could be more direct policy or action that's taken by the government or the local governments or the communities in which they live in. And we have to ensure that we include them in all the decisions that we make. So these historical practices that we find within our societies, these are significant barriers to ocean access for marginalized communities. So if we have a big corporation coming to the area and starting to establish a fishing operation or a processing plant, then it can actually work against the interests of the marginalized communities. One important barrier is a lack of information. They may be ignorant of market prices. They may be ignorant of other information that prevent them from making sound decisions and to actively participate in managing resources. So if you're kept in the dark about what's going on, how the markets are reacting, then you find yourself at a disadvantage right from the word go. And when you have this lack of information, you can't hold the authorities accountable for their actions. So what's the means for you to seek compensation, for instance, or to ask for greater access? You just don't know what's going on. And then if you are outside the game, then you don't have the opportunity to influence policies. So some key strategies for inclusive and equitable ocean action. We need community-led conservation and restoration initiatives. And this gives them ownership and responsibility for marine ecosystem protection, enhancing sustainability. You empower these communities to take action to ensure that they have a voice, to ensure that they can participate effectively, so that we can actually leverage the local knowledge. We can ensure greater compliance with regulations. And through such efforts, we can improve resilience to climate change, generate social and economic benefits through sustainable resource use and ecotourism, for instance. And incorporating indigenous knowledge strengthens conservation strategies and promotes cultural respect. It's a more holistic view, taking everybody on board. They may not always be right. Science may prove them wrong, but the fact that they are given a voice and they are given dignity within the process, that engenders confidence within the system, that people are heard. I think the worst thing is to be discounted right from the start when you enter into a decision-making process, that whatever view you have is held to be wrong. And we have locally driven restoration initiatives to help to preserve marine biodiversity and maintain ecosystem health. And I think quite importantly, the marine protected areas is a very important example of how local actions can actually have a major impact on reversing the damage that we've done to oceans. So policy development and participation in governance, we need inclusive policy making, we need transparent governance, and we need equitable decision making. So these are the three principles when we develop policies. Education is important, and what we have today is a good example. Education for the younger generation, but also education for the communities themselves. Very often they lack access to proper education. They may be illiterate, may not have simple things like skills for accounting. So we need them to be equipped with the skills to protect the oceans and respond to environmental challenges. We need training. Not only education, but training in the specific skills that they need. Training to improve the fishing the activities that they carry out, but training also to seek alternative employment, to get away from the dependence on a single resource. It's very important, particularly with those communities that are stuck with fishing for subsistence. And to do that, you need to develop and build capacity. And finally, it's important to share success stories and best practices. And the voluntary national report, for instance, is a very good example of how we do that. What's being done, how is it being done, what are the impacts, and how useful have they been. And I think all of you here will go back and share stories about what you've heard and what you learned from the other speakers about some of the things we can do to work together to build a sustainable world. And the best practices should not be merely kept as an archive, but they should also be encouraging replication. There's no one-size-fits-all. You have a best practice, you have to adapt it to the situation that you face. And working together and ensuring no one is left behind, we can ensure our oceans are sustainably managed for current and future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for highlighting the importance of equity and the need of integrating the voices of marginalized groups. And our next speaker is a climate scientist and a policy advisor working at the intersection of data, equity, and environmental resilience. Mr. Nicholas Stepsky serves at the Human Development Report Office of the United Nations Development Program, so he will present key findings from the Human Climate Horizons platform.
Nice. Perfect. And then just go around. No, that's good. Great. Okay, thank you to everyone, and thanks to Hannah for organizing and coordinating. Thanks to Dr. Lee for all of those wise and inspiring words. Yeah, so as Hannah mentioned, my name is Nicholas Debsky, or I go by Nick, and I am just across the street over here at the Human Development Report Office, which is part of UNDP that is responsible every year for producing the annual Global Human Development Reports, which have updates to lots of metrics that I'm sure some of you have heard of, like the Human Development Index and different types of human development indices that are adjusted for things like inequality, gender balance, and things like that. We've also been, in the last few years, looking at some that assess the planetary pressures that human activity sort of imparts on the global ecosystem through things like CO2 emissions and material footprint. And we're in the process of drafting some new metrics that look at sort of how those pressures then in turn threaten human securities and livelihoods, and kind of like trying to chart paths forward that countries can look to for achieving not just the SDGs, but also climate resilience and climate security as sort of chronic stressors like sea level rise and heat waves get worse, as well as acute shocks like severe storms. So that's sort of what we're doing there. My background, as was mentioned, is in climate science and looking at climate impacts and hazards and human migration, coastal impacts, what the likelihood is of different sea level rise happening in different parts of the world, and how that might manifest as people retreating inland, communities building like seawalls or protective infrastructure. And so I'll be talking about that, as well as some of the scientific pursuits that are related to that, and priorities for further research in the field. So again, some of my background here, I started at UNDP just kind of in the last year and a half after completing my grad school at UC Berkeley in an interdisciplinary program. And I was a member of the Climate Impact Lab and Global Policy Lab that looks at a lot of these things, and also worked before on kind of like freshwater river-based climate adaptation, like working with a lot of community scale, kind of like watershed authorities on modeling and adapting and preparing for climate change in different countries around the world, and have done a lot of kind of sea level rise and ocean science related research. So I'll walk you through some of that. I'll try not to get too hung up in some of the technical details, but I have a lot of graphs and charts, and so hopefully some of them will kind of like inspire some curiosity. Basically, I wanted to start out with this, which is a graph that goes back to 1880. And this is basically just showing the amount that the global sea level has risen in the last 100 and almost 150 years. Basically, since essentially the start of the industrial era, we've witnessed globally on the order of about a quarter meter at most, like 20 to 25 centimeters of sea level rise, which is not nothing, but it's not as much as is projected to start to occur in the next few decades, especially around 2050, 2060, and by the end of the century in 2100, really dependent on the paths that we collectively as a global community decide to take that will dictate how much sea level rise is going to impact different communities. And so there's a lot of uncertainty both around how global greenhouse gas emissions pathways are going to evolve, as well as how certain things like the ice sheets in Antarctica and Greenland will melt. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of these uncertainties and how it pertains to the challenges ahead. And so this is that same graph, but just it's sort of showing how the top line here shows global sea level rise, and then these blue and red lines show the different processes that are responsible for the sea levels rising. So when a bunch of heat from the sun like kind of penetrates the Earth's atmosphere and then gets trapped in the greenhouse gas effect, it gets trapped and sort of is absorbed either by land, air, or the oceans. And that is what is causing global warming. So when we say global warming, it's that there's more kind of thermal energy being trapped because there's too many greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that's not escaping. And so that causes a few things to happen. That causes temperatures to rise, which melts ice, like melts sea ice and melts glaciers and ice caps. And all that extra meltwater goes into the oceans and makes them rise. But actually, even more significantly, the additional heat that's absorbed by the oceans actually makes the water molecules themselves expand. And so as gases and fluids get warmer, they tend to expand. So actually the volume of the oceans, even if there was no ice melting, we would still have a lot of sea level rise just from the water getting warmer. And so this is a graph showing how much of that heat content is getting absorbed by the oceans over time. And in fact, the vast majority of the heat, when we say global warming, we tend to think about like, okay, it's getting hotter, in the air around me during the summer, like I'm sweating more and all that. But actually the vast majority, so over 90% of all the heat that is getting absorbed by the Earth is getting absorbed in the oceans. So we're not actually even feeling most of the extra energy that is being absorbed under global warming. The oceans are sort of acting as this big buffer for us. So if not for the oceans, we would actually be experiencing much higher temperatures from global warming. But that's not without its consequences. As we know, there are all these things happening with the fragile ocean ecosystem, such as acidification. And so there's big threats to coral reefs because as there's higher CO2, that exchanges with water molecules and makes more acid in the ocean water itself, which threatens marine life. And then the oceans can't just keep holding on to more and more heat forever, right? Eventually, it's gonna cause additional ice to melt, but it's also going to come into a state of kind of equilibrium with the atmosphere. So all this extra heat that the ocean is absorbing will eventually make its way into the atmosphere and will continue to warm our Earth. And so there's a lot of kind of inertia in this system. And some of the results, which I'm sure many of you have seen in the news and whatnot, we have as sea levels rise, we have more coastal flooding, partly because, and this can happen even in the absence of a big storm, but if sea levels are higher, and you know how there's tides as the moon cycle, and there's different things, there's high tides and there's low tides. There's a lot of times now where it can be a sunny day and there's no storm, but communities will experience what's called sunny day flooding. And so the streets will still flood, even though there wasn't a hurricane or a typhoon that caused it. But that being said, when there is a big storm, there's something that's called a storm surge. So with a typhoon and whatnot, when those things happen, there's a lot of high winds and low pressure that causes sea levels on a coastline to be higher than they normally would be. And if that baseline level of sea level is now higher because of sea level rise, when storms hit, it is gonna flood higher and like kind of further inland, right? And so the sea level rise, even if on a normal day it's not yet flooding your communities, because it's higher when storms do hit, it's gonna mean that more water can kind of make its way inland. And so these are just a couple photos from flood events that have occurred. And yeah, so relating this to the Sustainable Development Goals, because that's sort of our North Star of what everyone is talking about here. I wanted to just kind of highlight like which ones are relevant to the issue of kind of sea level rise and managing climate adaptation to rising sea levels and coastal threats. Obviously that has, that relates to the main SDG that is the topic of this discussion, which is 14, life below water, as well as pertains to climate action. And so I think when we saw the presentation before about the progress on the SDGs, I think we saw climate action was basically at the bottom. It had like 0% progress, right? Even if some of the other ones had some progress going, climate action is still, there's a lot of need for the global community to come together and really both mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, as well as even more importantly, to start adapting to the changes that we know are gonna happen, like sea level rise. And then SDG 3, good health and well-being, obviously pertains to sort of safety around climate threats, as well as SDG 11. And you could link more of these as well. But this is sort of in terms of our office at the Human Development Report Office. This is a photo on the left of the cover of our report from 2020, so the 2020 Human Development Report. And this is a quote from it, which says, a reimagined human development journey thus calls on all countries to improve well-being equitably while easing pressures on the planet. So there's this sort of tension, and then on the right, this is a schematic that's in the summary and in this sort of introductory chapter of that report that shows how interconnected human and planetary systems are, but how an imbalance in one can then reverberate into an imbalance in the other. So we have pressures on these systems, which can be thought of like increasing CO2 emissions and increasing global warming, and then that can increase risks of things like sea level rise and flooding and heat waves, and those risks manifest as those shocks. And then oftentimes we know that, say, when a typhoon or a heat wave hits a community that already suffers from sort of severe inequality or is marginalized and has fewer resources to adapt, those communities that are more vulnerable will suffer more impacts, whether or not it's monetary impacts or mortality, things like that. So oftentimes climate acts as this force that can kind of widen inequalities that we're already striving at the UN and throughout to try to sort of bridge those gaps. And so climate action is not just sort of like an action to save nature or to sort of like safeguard the business as usual. But having effective and sustainable climate action is also action for poverty and inequality and averting some of those things in the future as well. So as I'm sure you've heard in the US, there's like a lot of talk of the Green New Deal and like how the Green New Deal can achieve all these different things. And you know, politics aside, the vision of that talks about all of these interconnected kind of co-benefits of how addressing one thing can help alleviate some of the objectives and problems in other fields. And so this is kind of a busy but like I think comprehensive schematic that shows all these different processes that mostly kind of the marine and geophysical ones here. And so human systems are a little bit less represented here, sort of just as coastal infrastructure and land. You see some like agriculture here in cities, but basically there are so many different physical processes happening in the ocean and the atmosphere. So the atmosphere and the oceans are interacting all the time with one another, and that has huge implications for the health of fish, how many fish can survive, which then obviously impacts communities, like Dr. Lee discussed, that are very dependent upon fisheries, and then it impacts the formation and or melting of sea ice and ice sheets on land, which then again impacts things like sea level. And so some of the areas where we still, even the scientific community, like the IPCC and academia, there's still a lot of uncertainty. We haven't answered all the questions. I think in general with climate change and climate action, I think that we have more than enough information to already start acting now, right? I think if we could pause everything and put all our energy into acting on what we know, I think that would be better than uncovering new little bits of things. But that being said, the research is still very important, and there are things that we don't really know. One of the big ones is that we don't know how ocean currents, which are really, really important for transporting not only sort of temperature of water and temperature around the globe, as well as nutrients for fish. That is something that is often talked about as kind of a tipping point, and there's this fear that ocean currents could collapse with more global warming. But also, like I mentioned, there's a lot of melting ice sheets in Antarctica and in the Arctic on big land masses like Greenland and things like that. And there's a lot of uncertainty about how fast these big ice sheets are going to melt. And that actually has big implications for whether or not by the end of this century, we're looking at, say, 0.5 meter or 3 meters of sea level rise. So there's actually there's still a lot of scientific uncertainty around ice sheet kind of evolution and behavior, and that has big implications for how we prepare. And so I think adapting proactively in a way that acknowledges some of the risk up front is sort of somewhere that we need to go as well. And so I'll briefly go through some of the research that I've done that looks at that interaction between sea level and coastal infrastructure. And so this is a paper that I co-wrote that has fed into some of the work on the Human Climate Horizons platform that UNDP has produced that looks at coastal economic impacts of sea level rise throughout this century, so from now to 2100. And so you can see that in raw kind of dollar terms, the impacts kind of vary from place to place. This is sort of all the components. These are some other maps that show, these are just impacts of flooding from extreme storms. And so we can see that there's damage that happens to sort of capital assets. That's things like built infrastructure, but then there's also mortality. And in terms of mortality, this is kind of like, this is sort of expressed in terms of like a percent of a region's kind of GDP and kind of monetized damages from mortality, which is a problematic exercise, but what a lot of economists do. And so we can see that there's sort of differences of impacts. And then these are sort of like some of the big impacts moving forward in terms of costs under different scenarios. And so these ones over here to the right that say low likelihood, high impact, these are so this is global mean sea level rise, GMSL, and this is like if we're looking at 1.5 or 2 meters of sea level rise by the end of the century, we could have really, really high impacts to the economy. And this is if we sort of adapt. This is the cost if we still implement adaptation, like moving inland or building seawalls. But if we don't, then those damages become much, much higher if we don't sort of like act ahead of time. And so you can see on this axis, the damages go from sort of like around $1 trillion to up to $20 to $30 trillion by the end of the century. And for reference, the global GDP is like $80 to $90 trillion. So this is sort of like, if we're looking at some of these higher end scenarios, sort of like a third of the global GDP by the end of the century. And that's if we are not retreating all our kind of like exposed coastal cities and things like that. And so I won't get into these numbers, but this is just to say that there's a lot of benefit in terms of averted damages in undertaking proactive adaptation. And these are sort of the benefits, our estimated benefits of adaptation across the globe. And so you see that areas like South Asia and East Asia as well, there's a lot of benefits in implementing adaptation ahead of time before some of these happen. And that means like moving folks that are the most vulnerable inland in kind of a planned manner, as well as building seawalls and protective infrastructure. And this is sort of just talking about how risk is an interaction between these hazards and vulnerability and exposure. And actions to reduce that include things like coastal retreat, and the vulnerability gets into kind of what I talked about in terms of different inequality of communities and things like that. And so addressing kind of all of these at once is really what's important for sustainable action. I'll skip some of these. This is how many people we think will likely migrate inland under different scenarios due to sea level rise. And so this is this is expressed as a % of country's population total. And so in some areas, by the end of the century, we can expect under different adaptation strategies, anywhere from sort of 1 to 10 to 20% of country populations needing to kind of get out of harm's way in terms of sea levels rising. And so there's this platform that our office has called Human Climate Horizons, where you can go and explore some of these things in an interactive way. And you can go on and look at different profiles for any country, and you can see where sea level rise is happening along those coastlines and what that means in terms of how much sea level rise is expected under different scenarios moving forward by the end of the century, as well as sort of how many people are likely exposed. And so you can kind of zoom into some of these maps that I've been showing online and kind of go and interact. And so this is one of a few different types of metrics that are shown on this platform called Human Climate Horizons, which looks at heat-related mortality, impacts to agriculture, impacts to the labor market, as well as sea level rise. So I had some other discussion around impacts of ice sheet melt. Largely, I think one interesting aspect of this is that when sea level rise is happening due to melting ice, it doesn't happen uniformly across the whole globe. It's not like if you drop a bucket of water in the ocean, that is going to get distributed and impact all coastlines the same. There's something that relates to the fact that every bit of mass has its own gravitational pull. So like all the bodies in this room have gravity and they're attracting one another. It's the reason why the Earth has the moon that goes around it. Similarly, these big masses of ice on Greenland and in Antarctica have a ton of mass, and so they have their own gravitational pull, and that's actually pulling the ocean water up. So like near Greenland, all that ice is actually pulling water up towards it, and that's raising sea levels near all this ice. And as that ice melts and then gets recirculated around the ocean, that gravitational pull is gone. And so all that water that had been pulled up by the gravity of the ice now goes down. And so as ice melts in some places, we actually expect to see sea level fall. So around Greenland, on this lower left map, the spots that are blue, we actually expect as the Greenland ice melts, we expect to see that local sea levels will actually go down where there had been lots of ice due to this gravitational effect. So there's a lot of different competing factors. And this is just a picture of one of the biggest ice sheets in Antarctica that is sort of breaking apart, and there's a lot of uncertainty about how fast it's going to do so. And so yeah, those are just like a few of the kind of major scientific things, and some next steps and priorities are to continue addressing these gaps in the research field. And then, as Dr. Lee said, like look at success stories of coastal adaptation, resilience, and different sort of coordinated retreat. Whether that looks like a heavily westernized approach, like I like the contrast that he provided. There's a sort of westernized approach that often kind of gets a lot of the attention. And so on the left here, that's a picture of the Netherlands and all this very infrastructure heavy, like seawalls and these gates that can control the level of the water. And on the right, this is a UNDP funded project in Vietnam where folks are reforesting coastal mangroves that do a lot to sort of prevent flooding and flood damage. And that's an ecosystem-based approach that has been known to be effective for decades and decades. And so really leveraging both of these where they're appropriate is really sort of like what we have to do. And then integrating these findings into global reports like we're doing at our office and coordinating across UN agencies, country offices, partners, and policymakers. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for guiding us, connect data sets and the climate change that we are experiencing in our real life. I'm also very pleased to welcome our next speaker, Mr. Hyun Kim, a specialist in SDG financing and monitoring, who has worked across the United Nations system and development sectors. So he currently leads evaluation and reporting at UN Joint SDG Fund. So he'll be speaking on innovative financing on small island developing states and blue ocean economies. A round of applause, please.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here. I do have a presentation.
Yes.
But just before starting, I'm extremely happy to be here, especially because I think majority of the students here are from Incheon, if I'm correct. And I did my formative years actually there, doing middle school as well as high school in Incheon. So happy to be at Inhang 고등학교. I don't know if some of you might know. Maybe I came a long way since then. But it's a pleasure to be joining you. I'm happy to stay here. No problem. Thank you so much. So regarding the Joint SDG Fund, I understand that this event is focused on oceans and how youth can engage better in the blue oceans and economy space. And so what I thought would be interesting for you is, I can provide a brief introduction of what the fund is because maybe not everybody knows about it, but more about our investments in small island development states, as I mentioned, because it is related to how we operate in the blue economy space. So the Joint SDG Fund is a UN global pool fund, and it supports UN joint programs. For instance, with UNDP, with other entities like UNICEF, which is working on children, with UN Women, working on women, UN Environmental Program, working on environment. And we support them to join together because each of the entities have their own specialty or capacities, but we understand by joining together, there might be more synergies and integration happening. And so we asked the UN entities at the country level to combine together to work on big issues of trying to accelerate the SDGs. Currently, we're working with 32 UN entity partners in about, I don't think I have that information, in about 117 countries to date, working on areas of SDG acceleration. And this is our current strategy where we're focusing on 6 transition areas that have multiple impact linkages to the SDGs that the UN has agreed upon to work on, including in food systems, energy transition, digital, transformative education, social protection and jobs, climate, biodiversity, and pollution as well. And so those are the key areas of where we provide our investments in. While doing this, we emphasize the importance of gender, youth, human rights, and leaving no one behind through our implementation approaches. Just a brag slide on where we are in terms of our global reach, and we've invested around 340 million or so, working with, as I mentioned, 32 UN entities in about 120 countries. Through this, a big part of our investments have gone into working with private sectors, and a lot of the private sectors are youth-led entrepreneurs, as well as other types of businesses, trying to bring them into the economies, blue economies and other economies as well. And through that effort, we've leveraged, 6.6 billion or so in additional funding coming from different types of financial vehicles. I probably won't want to go into too much details, but around bonds as well as other guarantee schemes as well. But that's how the fund usually operates. But on the SIDS, which is small island development states, have been a very critical, I would say, target for the fund to operate in. Where during the pandemic, the DSG has asked us, the Deputy Secretary General of the UN, who is our chair within the fund, has asked us to create a new SID window, a small island development state window. And so we started to provide investments into the SIDS. Until now, we have, as you can see in the slide, about 50 million that has gone into these small island development states. Yes, not that much, but still I think it has been an important investment into these countries, considering that the UN's presence in these small island development states have been quite small as well, because a lot of the funds go into much more bigger country contexts rather than the SIDS, and so we try to enhance that. The other reason for this was last year there was a very big meeting around the SIDS called the SIDS Conference in Antigua, Barbuda, and so we activated our investments through those kinds of networks as well. And so you can see that a big chunk of that has gone into what we call socio-economic investments, where blue economy, what it means is that it's mainly about sustainable tourism. It's about enhancing, for instance, I think in Fiji we're supporting like a dive company where they're providing conservation activism while doing diving support as well at the same time. In other places, a lot of in the environmental sector, a lot of our support is in trying to get data. For instance, like the UN Human Development Report Office that is providing a lot of important data. We're trying to go into the small island development states and enhance their capacities to collect SDG data, because if you'll be surprised to know that not all of the SDGs, a lot of the nations cannot report on a number of the SDG data points. And so we're trying to enhance the transparency and the reportings of monitoring on the SDGs for the first, to see where changes can be made as well. These are just some examples of some of our key investments. As I mentioned, like the one in Fiji is there, where we're working with a number of different types of entities in the Fiji. In Cabo Verde, we're working with the stock market, for the stock market to have a bond that provides money for youth as well as for women groups to build new businesses around the blue economies, because Cabo Verde is a very small island state outside the coast of Africa that has a massive amount of beaches, and sustainable tourism is one of their main industries that they have, and so we're trying to raise the tourism markets over there as well. In Trinidad Tobago, as mentioned, we're working with the Central Statistics Office to enhance their national survey capacities, to gain data, and reach out to and digitalize their processes to make the data points more available. In Timor-Leste, we're working on social protection, including trying to enhance how their food security is enhanced by providing a food basket to people that are in need as well. And so these are just some examples of where we're putting some of our investments in. We do have a report that we issued on our SIDS investments that was published last year during the SIDS 4 conference. And so happy for you to take a look. If you Google the title, it should come up within your within the website that provides a lot more detail and better described than I have today. So hopefully that will be helpful as an inspiration. And that's my short presentation for now, but I'll be happy to answer any questions or have engagements further on as well. Sorry that I was late for the meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We're so glad to have you during this busy week. And yeah, so his slides shared some funding and financing activities that the fund is doing for sustainable marine environment as well. So the earlier session allowed us to hear structured insights from 3 speakers. Now I would like to open up a dialogue with a single discussion topic, which is how can international cooperation ensure equitable ocean action that includes vulnerable and underrepresented communities? So let's begin the conversation. I would like to, I actually prepared a question for each of you based on the presentation slides that you have provided me earlier. So first, for Dr. Lee, based on your experience working both in the UN system and the communities around the world, how can international cooperation ensure that those furthest behind, such as indigenous peoples, or coastal residents in poverty, as you have mentioned in your presentation, and small-scale fishers as well, they are meaningfully included in the policy decision processes?
Yeah, I think that's a tough question you posed me. I think all our governments and organizations are trying to be as inclusive as possible. It's often not easy because first you have to identify those vulnerable groups. You have to be able to communicate with them. And I think international cooperation is very important here, that we share information on how each country has dealt with their vulnerable communities, how they have been able to do global mapping to map them. Because if you go to any single country, you're not going to have poverty, for instance, evenly distributed around the country. There'll be pockets of poverty. And it's the same with coastal communities. You have to be able to identify them. So I think that's the first thing that you need to do with international cooperation. The second thing is, how do you have a mechanism that can reflect the views of people who are in vulnerable communities? The use of the multi-dimensional poverty indices gives you an insight to that you can actually look at avenues where you can cooperate to tackle poverty and, in particular, ensure equitable ocean action. At AGD Fourth World, we actually worked with the World Bank and IMF, and we have come up with a tool that allows us to work with communities in order to provide a feedback and assessment of policy decision. That's something that we are trying to disseminate more widely, and hopefully that will go through the UNDP process, the World Bank process. We are training their staff to begin implementing that. And I think that needs to be shared through a more global platform.
Thank you so much. Or Nick or Mr. Hyun Kim, do you have any other ideas to share with the audiences by any chance? Or I actually do have another question for you. Yeah, so Mr. Adevsky, so on your slides, your work show how climate impacts differ widely across regions. In your view, how can the international community ensure that this kind of data sets translate into policies that prioritize the most affected and overlooked populations?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. So I think it's a great question, and I've worked mostly on the side of climate adaptation in the climate science field versus climate mitigation, in terms of adaptation being how do we respond and sort of prepare for some of these things, and mitigation is the focus on renewable energy and reducing combustion of CO2. They're both highly important, but I think there has been a lot of discussion on mitigation and a lot of international targets set on emissions reductions, and sort of like this concept of common but differentiated responsibility between countries based on how much they've emitted in the past. And so it's these like big emitters. We're saying that they should sort of be the ones that are most responsible for reducing emissions or funding reduced emissions elsewhere. But where a similar sense of kind of shared responsibility hasn't really received as much attention, it is starting to, is on the adaptation side of things. And so I sort of feel like it would be, it's needed to start discussing how adaptation can both be funded and then carried out in different countries in a similar framework, where countries that maybe have contributed more can help small island developing states with the financing front either do planned coordinated retreats or strengthening of coastal infrastructure. And where the data come in on the regional differences, it's really crucial to know which places are the most vulnerable, just from sort of a topographical standpoint. Are they the lowest lying in terms of elevation? Do they have the most people living kind of within like high tide floodplain and extreme sea level during storm zones? And are the people that live there sort of living in sort of vulnerable infrastructure? And then kind of what would it cost to adapt in a sustainable way? And then I think the funding question, and we're trying to get at this kind of with the shared loss and damage fund in the UN, and that is still very, very underfunded. But that's sort of supposed to be this global piggy bank that is like essentially trying to get at this issue. There is not enough money that is placed into it, and I think other mechanisms, both public and private sector, need to be explored.
Thank you so much. So for Mr. Hyun Kim, yeah, thank you. So as we've seen, many vulnerable countries, especially small island development states, face limited access to financing. What approaches or innovations do you see as most promising to ensure that ocean-related finances actually reaches the communities that need in the most?
No, thank you for the question. I think if we knew that answer, we wouldn't have the problem in the first place as well. That said, I think from the UN side, we are trying to attract, we mostly work with governments a lot of times in the public, taxation space, in the domestic resource mobilization space as well. But the small islands are very small, and it's very hard to actually act on that. And so as my colleague was mentioning, there are these global entities like the Pool Fund, but also more bigger ones like the loss and damage ones. In Korea, you have the Green Climate Fund, which is investing a lot also in small island development space. And I think we're trying to rally different types of mechanisms to provide the investments. That said, that cannot just be the case. We need to try to get also the private sector to invest more in these small environment states as well. At this moment in time, if you look at the oceans area, I understand that most of the money are going into much bigger countries like Indonesia, for instance, that has definitely a very important role in oceans, but not, and it's a much more middle income country. And so there is a lot more opportunities for investments to go there. But what we are trying to do in the UN with our small fund is try to, what we're calling concessionality, by giving a little bit of money and matching it with other private sector investments to come in and make it less risky for them to invest also there. And so that's the idea that we're trying to push. It's not easy and it's quite difficult, but I think that's one of the ways that we're trying to work. I hope that responds. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So if we have time, I will be very happy to collect any 1 or 2 questions from the floor. So if you've got any, please let me know. And our staff will be handing out the microphone as well. Yes, please.
So just to know how we can get the presentation here. The presentation?
Mm-hmm.
How do we get them?
Okay, so after the event, we'll make sure to upload on our website, which is hfa/hlpf.org. The website, hfa/hlpf.org. hlpf.org. Also, one of my staff member can make sure that the website address is correct. Thank you. If no question happening, we've got a long way till here. So I think it's time for us to take a quick group photo with a 3-minute break for the audiences who are joining through YouTube before we welcome our young presenters. So yeah, all of the speakers, invited speakers, including Ambassador Dennis Sangtuon, we can maybe come to the front and take a quick group photo before the session 2 with young presenters begin. So now it's time to hear directly from the next generation of leaders. We'll welcome 3 youth presenters from Incheon, South Korea, who have been actively engaged in exploring regional ocean challenges and developing their own proposals for change. So there are 3 presenters. Each of them will share a short presentation reflecting their unique perspectives on the importance of SDG 14, starting from East Asian level, national level in South Korea, and then local level in Incheon. So please join me in welcoming our first student speaker, Hayoung Chae.
Hello everyone, my name is Hayoung Choi and I'm a second-year student at Mature Foreign Language High School. It's a great honor to have the opportunity to present today on such an important topic. Today, I'll talk about the global significance of the East Asian coast, the growing crisis of marine pollution in this region, and a possible solution to address this issue. East Asian coast is a region of global importance. It's a key route for international trade and is home to a wide range of marine species. Along the eastern coast of South Korea, cold and warm ocean currents meet, creating ideal conditions for various marine species. Moreover, vast mudflats along the East Asian coastline are not just muddy land. They are habitats for crabs and shellfish and serve as essential stopovers for migratory birds traveling along the East Asian-Australasian flyway. However, recently, the marine biodiversity along the East Asian coast has come under serious threat, posing a direct challenge to achieving SDG 14 life below water. While the East Asia is known for its rich marine biodiversity, it's also facing one of the world's most severe marine pollution crises. There are many contributing factors, including high population density and unchecked coastal development. But among them, the most important issue is the inflow of plastic waste. It's estimated that the East Asian coastal countries such as China, Indonesia, and Vietnam are responsible for about 60% of global marine plastic waste. Let's take a closer look at the plastic waste commonly found along the East Asian coast. Fisheries are highly developed in this region. In particular, countries like China, South Korea, and Japan are heavily rely on net fishing, which leads to the widespread use and disposal of fishing nets. Additionally, due to the popularity of food delivery and convenience store culture, items such as plastic cups, straws, and bags are often discarded and eventually reach the ocean through beaches or rivers. Over time, these discarded plastics break into microplastics, which infiltrate the marine ecosystems. So why is it important to preserve the marine ecosystem? The preservation of marine ecosystem is important for several reasons. First, marine organisms form a complex and interconnected food chain. When the population of a particular species increases or decreases rapidly, it can collapse the entire food chain, which leads to a breakdown of marine ecosystem as a whole. In addition, coastal coral reefs play an important role in in maintaining natural balance. The East Asian coast contains some of the world's largest coral reef and seagrass areas. They are not only just habitats for marine life, but also serve as natural barriers that protect our coastline that we live in. However, in many areas of East Asia, plastic pollution has severely damaged the marine ecosystems. One example is China. As you can see on this graph, China has the world's largest fishing industry. In the waters near Zhoushan Island, a key fishing region, marine pollution has become a serious problem. Studies have shown that various fish and crustaceans in this area are consistently found to contain significant amounts of microplastics. This not only harms marine life, but also raises serious concerns about food safety. Also, abandoned fishing nets have been found to entangle marine mammals like dolphins and sea turtles, causing injuries or even death. Another serious case can be seen along the coast of Jakarta, Indonesia. Each day, between 10 to 23 tons of marine waste flows into Jakarta's coastal waters, which is equivalent to dumping the weight of 8 to 17 cars into the ocean every day. These waste mainly flows through 13 rivers into the sea. As a result, garbage patches have formed in northern Jakarta Bay. This pollution has led to many fish being found dead, floating on the surface of water. And also, entanglement incidents have also been frequently reported. Marine animals often get their fins, beaks, or necks caught in plastic waste, which results in serious injuries and even death. This issue is not confined to a single country. It is a shared crisis affecting the entire East Asian region, and therefore, it requires a strong cooperation from all nations involved. In response to this urgent need, East Asian countries have made various efforts to address this challenge and promote sustainable ocean management, especially through cooperation under the East Asian Seas Congress. This EAS Congress is an international marine conference organized by the PEMC, the Partnerships in Environmental Management for the Seas of East Asia. It began in 2003 with the goal of enhancing the cooperation among countries to protect the marine ecosystems and promote sustainability. Since then, it has been held every 3 years. During the Congress, government officials and marine experts from various countries gather to discuss major ocean-related issues like marine pollution, climate change, and biodiversity conservation. The most recent Congress was held in Xiamen, China in 2024. It included policy discussions, international academic sessions, exhibitions, and a youth forum. This Congress not only focuses on policy making, but also emphasizes the role of future generations by actively engaging young people into discussions and actions. Based on this, I have developed a solution to marine pollution. It's the East Asian Marine Spatial Management Map. In this project, youth organisms from each country would investigate the current status of plastic waste along their coastlines and monitor changes in local marine species. The collected data would be visualized on a shared interactive map, updated in real time, and made publicly available through an open platform based on Google Maps. This idea was inspired by real-time traffic systems where users can instantly check conditions across multiple areas. In the same way, this marine management map would allow users to view up-to-date information from various East Asian coasts all in real time. The image on the right shows an AI-generated concept of what the map could look like. Since the type and amount of marine waste, as well as the species in danger, are different by region, this map would highlight those regional differences. This is the most important part of this platform. In addition to the map, youth representatives from each country would meet regularly to share updates on their nation's marine pollution status, and they would jointly propose policy recommendations. Through these efforts, young people can become active participants in marine conservation and grow into future leaders committed to preserving a sustainable marine ecosystem. Through these activities, I believe that young people across the East Asia can gain a deeper understanding of their own coastal ecosystems, and they can also develop a global perspective on marine issues, learning how to work together across the borders. The marine ecosystem is closely connected to human life. It regulates the Earth's climate, produces over half of the oxygen that we breathe, and also supports countless species, including our own. So, protecting the ocean is not just about saving marine animals, it's about safeguarding our own future. Building a sustainable ocean cannot be accomplished by a single country alone. We must collaborate across borders and across generations to create real and lasting change. And if young people take the first step, I believe it could be a significant turning point. Recognizing that we are all connected by the sea can become the starting point for a much larger change in marine ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Hyung, for sharing your regional analysis and integration idea of youth and technology as well. Next, we'll hear from Haewon Kang, who will highlight the growing challenge of marine waste in South Korea. A round of applause, please.
Hello, I'm Haewon Kang. I'm attending Yale High School in Incheon. The topic I will present today is the growing issue of marine waste in South Korea as a coastal country. Today, based on the topic, I would like to identify the exciting ocean-related problems and share what we have tried to do overcome and suggest a creative idea to tackle this. Also, as I conducted a survey of more than 350 South Korean youth on SDG 14, so I will sharing the result as well. First, I will present two problems in South Korea. The first problem is microplastic pollution is serious. Before we get started, do you know about microplastics? Let's define what microplastics are. Plastic between 1 micrometer to 5 millimeter in size, and it is internationally fine manufactured or used. In a detailed case study, the average of a concentration of microplastic in 20 beaches was 2,776 particles per meter square, which is the number per unit area of shorelines. In south surface of the ocean was 246 particles per meter cube, the number per unit volume of ocean surface. To clearly describe the marine pollution in South Korea, we also compared the Jeju Coast in South Korea and Saskatchewan River in Canada, where there is a large differences in microplastic concentrations, and the average of microplastic particles per liter of the water was found to be 0.6 in Jeju in South Korea and 0.026 in North Saskatchewan River. Based on the numerical data, we can realize the severity of microplastic pollution in South Korea, which is about 7 times higher than in Canada. The second issue is the lack of awareness among youth about marine ecosystems. Do you know about the Sustainable Development Goal 14? Yeah, thank you for answering. I found through the survey I conducted that 55.1% of 355 South Korean youth answered that they don't know much about SDG 14, which is to conserve levels below water. It indicated a low level of awareness. So, what is the cause of this problem? The first reason is the rainwater seepage caused by urban development. As a city develops, there are more water surface like aspergillus and cementicide works. These surfaces do not allow snow or rain to soak into the ground so that water flows over them. As a result, the amount of rainwater seepage increases, and the studies have shown that up to 10,080 particles per liter in land were found in industrial and residential areas. This shows rainwater runoff is a key pathway through which microplastic from land are moved into rivers or oceans. The second reason is the policies have not been very effective. For example, South Korea's Marine Environment Management Act mainly focuses on collecting and treating waste rather than reducing the amount of waste being produced. This means that it's not been very successful in taking the root causes of the problem. In 1995, Korea introduced a pay-as-you-go trashy bag system, so people must buy special government-approved bags to throw away general waste. This has been somewhat effective in reducing household waste, but it has some downside. The cost of trashy bags depend on their size, and the more trashy you throw away, the more you have to pay. Because of this, some could think, I won't use a fisher bag, and dump their waste illegally. In some cases, their waste ends up in rivers and eventually flows into the ocean, contributing to marine pollution. The third reason that youth have little experience with marine ecosystem activities, and there is enough education on this topic in schools. In fact, according to the data we collected, when students were asked, have you ever received any lessons or education related to the marine protection or SDG 14 at school, were answered 52.8% responded, no, I have not. When asked, have you ever participated in an activity to protect the marine environment, more than half of students answered no. So, what kind of effort is needed to solve this problem? Based on the data showing that teenagers have low awareness and less active participation in marine-related issues, I suggest two solutions. The first solution is to hold a regional mascot contest for students. Mascots should reflect both the local characteristics and the themes related to marine pollution and marine life. For example, in Incheon, where we are from, we could create mascots that use color and symbols representing the region. I believe the contest will not end here, but will expanding in long-term projects such as exploring the contaminated coastal areas or beaches, cleanups with the winning mascots. By visualizing marine issues through student-led mascot, this can encourage independent participation and make environmental action feel more accessible to youth. It would also be a valuable opportunity to learn about and reflect on the current state of the marine ecosystem in an engaging way. Second option is to conduct a zero waste challenge at the school level. First, the school measures the amount amount of the measure of the plastic waste during designated weekly recycling hours, then if the amount plastic waste decreases compared to the previous months, the school will receive eco-friendly conducts such as Ohu capsures. Ohu capsure is an edible water container made from seaweed, or renewable packaging products from companies like Nopla, which develop sustainable materials using seaweed and plants. Therefore, I would like to emphasize once again the importance of a sustainable marine management in South Korea, and based on the problems and solutions we discussed today. In the future, I believe that South Korea should not only focus on creating new policies, but also carefully examine the effectiveness and impact of them, and purpose independent and practical improvements that thoroughly address the root causes. In addition, we, the youth who are the leaders of the future, have an important role today. Role to play. It is to raise awareness about the serious of marine pollution and to be the starting point of changes through continuous interesting and practice. The idea I propose today can only become a reality when all of us here work together. Let's be the generation that protects our ocean, not just in words, but in action. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Haewon, for sharing such an interesting survey results. And it actually recalled my responsibility to bridge the gap and to raise the awareness on the sustainable development goals among youth in South Korea. So moving to the final speaker, I would like to welcome Yeonhoo Oh, who'll be talking about Incheon, where she is from and where she is residing in. A warm round of applause, please.
Hello, my name is Oh Yeonhoo, and I'm from Incheon, and I'm still a resident of Incheon, and I would like to talk about maritime challenges in the cosmopolitan city of Incheon. So, before we start, we should know Incheon. So, do you know Incheon? What is Incheon? Have you heard about that? Yeah, thank you for your answering. Incheon is just not a city. Incheon is a vibrant international hub that plays a pivotal role in connecting East Asia to the rest of the world, spanning over 1,069 square kilometers and home to more than 3 million people. Incheon reflects the dynamic blend of culture, commerce, and community. However, we embrace our role as a global city. We must confront some maritime challenges. Let's take a look at, firstly, the feature of the coast of Incheon, and next, the ecological value of its wetlands and mudflats, and thirdly, the challenges we are facing, and lastly, the actions youth are taking to preserve and protect the coast of Incheon. First, so what is a maritime city? We should know that maritime city is a specialized urban area that supports marine industry and its community, often located on ports or along the coastlines so that they can take advantage access to the sea. And Incheon is a maritime city too. It is located on the west coast of South Korea, and it has about 168 islands and a big, long, expansive coastline. And we got two important things of the coast of Incheon. There are mudflats and wetlands. First, mudflats is not only beautiful but also important on marine ecosystem. It has three features. First, it is spawning grounds for marine life, and its second is also stopover points for migratory bird. And third, and it's also key habitats for marine ecosystems. Maybe we can focus on wetlands this time. Wetlands is not just beautiful landscapes. It is also important environment of a rich diversity of marine life. It is critical habitats for fish species, benthic organisms, seaweeds and shellfish, and even endangered migratory birds. Wetlands goes beyond just biodiversity. It plays a key role in carbon storage, which is essential in our fight against climate change. In addition, it is natural filters. It removes pollutants from oceans before the water flows into the ocean. By doing that, improves ocean water quality and supports the overall health of marine environment. As we explore the feature of Incheon's coast, preserving these natural resources is essential for marine diversity and protecting the livelihoods of local community. So, what is the pressing issues of the coast of Incheon, a region of significance of marine environment? To begin with, Incheon's coastal waters are burdened by marine pollution. Alarmingly, Incheon's coast, along with the neighboring Gyeonggi region, has been ranked as second most plastic polluted area in the world. A recent study shows how serious this is. According to the data, the number of microplastic particles per cubic meter of the coast of Incheon ranges from a minimum of 4.75 to a maximum of 8.19. Given the size of Incheon Sea, these numbers are far from small. To see how serious this is, we can compare it to the upstream of Han River, which has the largest catchment area of any river in South Korea, even larger than the River Thames in the UK. The concentration of microplastic of Han River is 3.48, while in Sea Island, the most polluted area in Incheon, the figure reaches 8.19, a difference of more than 4 particles per cubic meter. This comparison shows the microplastic pollution in Incheon's coast is at a high risk level, and we need an immediate action. Microplastic poses a serious threat because many sea animals mistake them for food, and this not only harms individual species but also disrupts in the entire ecosystems. Over time, the toxins from the microplastics build up through food chain, and eventually they reach humans, causing real harm to our health. It is not just about protecting fish or the ocean, it is about protecting ourselves and making sure that the ocean remains safe, healthy, and sustainable for future generations. The second problem is land reclamation and the resulting loss of natural habitats. Over the past centuries, land reclamation has had a profound impact on marine environment. Large areas of mudflats have been transformed to make ways for developments, including airports, ports, industrial parks, and new towns, and so on. This expansion not only has destroyed critical marine ecosystems, but also placed enormous pressure on local fisheries and the livelihoods of fishermen who depend on these ecosystems. For example, the ongoing extraction of sea sand near the Changbong Wetland Reserve is disrupting the delicate balance of marine life, also the future of the local fishing communities. The third problem is the loss of endangered and flagship species. Flagship species, a term coined by United Nations Environment Program, refers to key plants and animals that can represent the ecosystem of a particular region. Incheon is also home to several of these key species and flagship species, typically the white-footed river crab and the spotted seal is here. But they face serious threat because of the habitat destruction these days, ongoing land reclamation, and other development projects are threatening their survival. For example, the spotted seal, the left side one, depends on coastal habitats for breeding and feeding, but they are in trouble these days. So as we witness changes, the urgency of taking conservation action is increasingly clear. Addressing these issues requires collective action, especially youth actions, who are the leaders of today, and they also the voice of tomorrow. I'm sure they show a fresh perspective and bring creative ideas that can solve complex problems. So, what kind of ideas can youth come up with to tackle Incheon's marine issues? What are some realistic and tangible ways they can contribute? Let's look at a real example. This is a campaign organized by one of the students, grade 2 in Yale High School in Incheon. They created their own promotional merchandise designs so they can raise awareness for vanishing species such as black-headed gull and sangwengi. They also organize garbage collection activities at Uwangli Beach in Incheon. This shows how young people take meaningful actions in their communities. So, what else? And how can we do to raise awareness like this? That's why we propose Unfold the Story of the Ocean, Incheon Ocean Fairy Tale Competition. With its rich histories, traditions, and culture, Incheon stories have been passed down through generations. Now, we want to create youth to build on those stories related to marine issues. Their stories will be submitted as entries to the competition, and a panel of judges review them, and only selected entries will be published as real books. And they will be further developed in collaboration with NGOs, international organizations, and so on. This will be great ways to showcase ancient stories with the world and raise awareness to marine-related issues. I know that in this room we have many NGOs, international organizations, educational institutions, and so on. So will you all join us? We're counting on you. Incheon stands as beacon of what a sustainable marine city can achieve. This means we must come together. We need youth, we need you, we need everyone. So, what kind of skills do we need? As global citizens, we must develop some skills for a sustainable future, a future that we can pass on our children and grandchildren. First step is think. Think deeply about the challenges we're facing. What is the problem? What does it matter? The second step is write. Put your thoughts into words. Shape your thoughts into policies, solutions, or actions. More importantly, act. Nothing gets done without action. It's time to act. It's time for you to move forward and join us for a sustainable, more a bright future. As young people, we are not just observers. We have to clearly communicate, understand, and respect, and always learn new things to make a real change. With these skills, we can make a better world. I mean, that is the more sustainable, more kinetic, and more inclusive. So let's act now. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you so much, all three presenters, for sharing your commitment to ocean action. So as we near the end of today's side event, it is my great honor to introduce a distinguished global leader who has long served as the highest level of multilateral diplomacy. Ambassador, could you please come to the stage? So His Excellency Dr. Denis Antoine is the former permanent representative of Grenada to the United Nations, and he has served as a vice president of the 69th General Assembly of the United Nations. With over 4 decades of diplomatic experience, Dr. Antoine has championed ocean governance, and he's also the founder of the Friends of Oceans and Seas. Please join me in welcoming His Excellency for his closing remarks.
This is the first time I raised my head since coming into this room. So I wish to acknowledge honorable diplomats present, diplomatic representatives, distinguished senior associate of hope of the future. Let's give Hannah a hand, please, everybody. I am very pleased to acknowledge the engaging presence of representatives of this youthful core of young leaders on the panel from South Korea who have presented at this forum for the scope and maturity of their presentations. It is reassuring. I'm told to keep the mic closer and let me put my, okay. It is very reassuring that this gathering of stakeholders and messengers that will help to generate our sustained future and guarantee that future. Every advantage must be taken of the important agreements reached by the United Nations on how to develop blue economy. Opportunities highlighted contain fundamentals to be understood, particularly about the small island developing states, policy and diplomatic process. Reference must be made of the issues which are included in Chapter 17 of Agenda 21, which speaks to the agreement on ocean conservation, rational use, and development coming out of the Rio 2019-22 and the Samoa Pathway and the SEEDS Agreement on the SDG Real Partnership and SDG 14 Save the Oceans package under the global goals. These are just a few agreements that marine scientists and ocean governance frameworks refer to when talking about blue economy. I refer to SEEDS And SIDS must be looked at as large ocean states where small size is not seen as an economic disadvantage. But the island's large exclusive economic zones with their blue economic sectors and blue workforces are seen as a distinct advantage. Now, my dear ocean leaders, colleagues, and fans, if you're here because you believe in what we're talking about, then we are all converts in this room, and we're speaking to each other. The question is, how do we get this message to the villages and the community? Because the United Nations is not this building. It is the people in every village, every community, every province in our world. So, my dear network leaders, small island developing states are in a crossfire of multiple crises. Climate change has economic and social repercussions, especially those that depend on tourism. The climate crisis severely set back efforts to invest in the Sustainable Development Goals. Leaving no one behind in oceans means that the call for strong collaboration between the institutions responsible, for example, for agriculture, rural development, trade, environment, nutrition, health, and social security cannot be ignored. Aquaculture now provides half of all fish for human consumption. And in small island developing states like Grenada, fishery exports provide high net trade revenues, more than meat and tobacco and rice and sugar. Now, coastal vulnerabilities in East Asia and beyond requires climate action. And climate action is becoming increasingly urgent. As weather-related disasters have doubled in 2 decades, with island nations being most vulnerable and least responsible. The 2024 International Community Review of SIDS Sustainable Development Progress, which took place in Antigua and Barbuda, proposed a new decade of partnerships and solutions to supercharge the path to resilient prosperity. Now, the United Nations is committed to supporting islands in their quest for a more resilient, sustainable future, acknowledging that their problems are not theirs to face alone. The common interest in small island developing states in oceans link them to global network action on blue growth and food security. Grenada is a stakeholder in the group of Friends of Oceans and Seas at the United Nations. Small island states have become system thinkers because system thinking needs to be applied together with theoretical framing of our work in policy and public policies. Today, small island developing states focus on innovation in the context in which the overall sustainable development prospects. Now, system thinking, therefore, is embedded in SIDS policy and diplomatic process. The extent, in other words, let me slow down because I'm getting a little excited because when I listened to these young presenters, young diplomats, I feel encouraged. And so I speak as I do because I have been part of the framing of the SDGs. So the expected accomplishments of this meeting, which affirms that we have a collective intergenerational responsibility to promote measures to ensure safeguarding of sustainable development goals and the maintainable use of marine resources, and that is worth highlighting. So in April 2015, the group of Friends of Oceans and Seas was formed at the United Nations. 5 co-chairs, one for each of the 5 regions of the United Nations, were identified. And the co-chairs were Fiji, Senegal, Estonia, Grenada, the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Now, it is encouraging that the work of the Blue Youth Ambassadors on this panel is focused on ensuring the integrity of Sustainable Development Goal number 14, pertaining to oceans and seas. But I have been thinking about our rivers. I've been thinking about our lakes. I've been thinking about our springs and tributaries. They rush into the seas. So we have to think about the impact of the land. The SDGs adopted in September 2015 serve as a guide for global development efforts between the years 2015 and 2030. There is less than 5 years left in that cycle. Now, therefore, let us not allow hope to fade because of our current challenges or disappointments with the situation of our oceans and seas. In this great future in which we are, remember, just think, we have come to this future further than any other generations. So in this great future in which we are, some of our challenges must be seen as unintended consequences in the pursuit of gains. But we must pledge to build on the gains from lessons learned. We must hasten to run and pass on the torch of hope in an intergenerational relay to achieve sustained, positive, and trusted partnership for the benefits of generations to come. The sentiments of hope must be reinforced by involving people of different ages. I am not seeing enough old people in this room. I'm only seeing young people. So we have to mix it, and I'm applauding these young people for the depth and the scope of their readiness. Therefore, with shared responsibility as a strategy that will ensure a sustainable future. As I close, mobilizing students for ocean action must become a global movement that incorporates ageless learners through early intervention with lifelong learning goals that takes UN to our communities to mobilize our populations for ocean action. I applaud the Blue Youth Initiative that gives us hope to the future. I ask that the accomplishments of this forum be widely shared as we return to our UN communities, because you are now messengers and functionaries, since you're the converts and because you came. I thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for highlighting again the value of the intergenerational dialogue in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and youth engagement as well. So actually, although this side event is held in alignment of the high-level political forum on sustainable development, I'm sure that it worked as a catalyst by bridging between generations and inviting the youth speakers who can actually take action for change and be the agent of change for further achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals with special focus on SDG 14, Life Below Water. On behalf of all the staff members and the organizing committee, I would like to thank very much for all the participants, speakers, and the student presenters to be part of this movement and today's side event. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I think the event is now over. So if you don't mind, I would like to have everyone to the stage for the group photo. Yeah, so please feel free to come to the front. Maybe I think in front of the table would be the best place to take the photo. So would you please stand up and be here for the photo as well?
We give some people Q&As.
Yes.